The 2010 Time Magazine Person of the Year was Mark Zuckerberg, the guy who, of course, has built the infrastructure for the social media revolution. The 2011 Time Magazine Person of the Year, or People of the Year, has just been announced, and it was awarded to a person called the Protester. The Protester is a rather vague person, perhaps, on the streets of London, New York, Cairo, Istanbul. But one person who perhaps understands the Protester more than others is Kurt Andersen, because Kurt was the guy who wrote the award up for Time Magazine and described why we should give the Protester Time Magazine's Person of the Year for 2011. Kurt, welcome to TechCrunch TV.
Happy to be here.
So was this a tough decision, Kurt, on the part of...
Well, I didn't make the decision. But as soon as the editor of Time, Rick Stengel, phoned me two or three months back and said, keep it to yourself. This is what we're doing. Are you interested in writing it? I said, having not thought about who should be Person of the Year until that moment, thought that's exactly right. That's who it should be. I quickly went through in my head who the alternative candidates might be, and thought, no, that's exactly right. And interested me as a writer to think about what all these various protesters from Tunis to Cairo to Athens to New York to Oakland and all over the world have in common, and what obviously the things they don't share, and trying to figure out what was it about this as a kind of defining political trope of 2011, and how did it happen? And were there connections more than simply, oh, all these people protested? And indeed, there were real connections.
Well, Kurt, before we get on to the Protester, did this person deserve it more than Steve Jobs, do you think? It seemed to me as if he was the natural Person of the Year, given his public struggle against cancer and his enormous influence on our culture, and the fact that I don't think he's ever won a Time Magazine Person of the Year.
Yeah, well, he certainly would have been an apt candidate in any of a number of years of the last 35. Again, I don't work for Time Magazine, so I don't make these choices, but what they have always done is A, picked a living person, and B, picked a person whose influence on that year was most significant. So the fact that Steve Jobs died this year made him, certainly all of us, think about his impact, his influence, his achievements, and we did that. So I know, in fact, that the editors had a lively and ongoing debate about whether Steve Jobs might be the Person of the Year, and decided against it.
Well, we had Walter Isaacson on the show last week telling us perhaps why Steve Jobs should have won it. So we've got you this week. Who are these protesters, and why were they the People of the Year in 2011?
Well, they were on the one hand all kinds of people facing all different kinds of stakes. I mean, the people who rose up in police states like Tunisia and Egypt exactly a year ago had a very different set of, they had one central demand in each case, get rid of the dictator, although even that wasn't initially, in either case, their demand. And they faced torture and death as the downsides of protesting, which is very different than people in Athens, Madrid, the United States face. But that said, they shared a lot too. They tended to be middle class people in their respective countries. They tended to be more educated people. They tended, in many cases, to be people who weren't particularly political until 2010, 2011, for whom, in most cases, some instance of their regime overreaching finally being the last straw and saying, okay, I'm going to the street. We have our politics are a sham. And that sense too, I mean, again, yes, occupiers of Wall Street are very different than the people who rose up in Tunis and Cairo. But this sense that they have no alternative in a way of bringing attention to the sense that their politics are dysfunctional, their economy is dysfunctional, that the ordinary forms of political life, of which there were strictly delimited, obviously, in places like Tunisia and Egypt, where they weren't going to play that game anymore, and they had to take to the streets. Then the fact that, as I did the reporting and went over to Tunisia and Egypt and talked to lots of the people involved in those revolutions, the fact that Tunisians arise, that not only inspired the Egyptians to arise, but there was communication between these successful revolutionaries and then these revolutionaries in Egypt who did the same thing 3 weeks later. And similarly, that caught the attention of people who were dissatisfied in Madrid, who saw Tahrir Square in Cairo as an example of what they could do in Madrid, and so forth. So it wasn't an accident. It was actually a contagion. The other thing they all share, to an extraordinary degree, to a degree that I think, if anything, has been understated in this country, is the role of social media.
Well,
I went in thinking, having read Malcolm Gladwell on this a year ago, and just being somewhat of a contrarian and a skeptic, thinking, oh, these really weren't Twitter revolutions. These weren't Facebook revolutions. Well, in Egypt and Tunisia, to an extraordinary degree, they were. And that isn't just some American techno lovers' wishful idea of oh, yes, we had a role in this, of enabling democracy and struggle and protest. It was really true. The person after person after person to whom I talked, of leaders in Tahrir Square, minor people, all kinds of people, really talked about the way in which social media, Facebook in particular, was key as to these protests and insurrections, both in telling people who never protested before, here's where you go, here's what you do, here's what time you do it, that kind of mobilization, but also in police states, certainly, or places where the media is not free or independent, getting out news of the protests, of the crackdowns against the protests, of protesters being shot and killed by police, and so forth. So it became this sort of, in the way that digital utopians have always talked about and dreamed about, it became this alternative indigenous free press in countries like Tunisia and Egypt. So, and again, with very much smaller stakes, very much different situations, social media and digital technology in general have been used to great effect by occupiers, by protesters in Europe as well.
Kurt, you've written a very powerful novel about 1848, Heyday, which won a lot of prizes. And in your piece in Time magazine, you seem to hint that 2011 might be seen as a similarly symbolic year in world history. In 1848, of course, you had these revolutions built around the Industrial Revolution. Could you think, when we stand back, when historians in a generation or two looks back at 2011, will it be seen as this great revolutionary year of our new digital world, in the same way as 1848 was seen as the revolutionary year of our incipient industrial world?
I would say it's a good bet, not a sure thing, of course, but a good bet. And looking at 1848 too, it was this extraordinary year. Similarly, this contagion through the monarchies of Europe, one after another, within days and weeks, and in some cases enabled by the new technology of the time. So yes, but looking at 1848, without exception, all of the revolutions of that year were turned back, quashed, after a brief periods of success lasting months at most, they were all turned back. So 1848 has its reputation as a year of revolution, yes, but as, in the event, a year of doomed revolutions. So we'll see. And it was interesting in that context to talk to people in, again, places like Egypt, where they feel as though a Rubicon has been crossed, that once the popular protest gets us a measure of freedom thing has been let out of the box or out of the toothpaste tube, there's no going back. We'll see. I do think, it would be foolish of me to say, oh yes, it's going to be every bit as huge as 1848 when we look back at it a year from now, or 20 or 50 years from now. But I think there's no question that this will be one of those years that historians and students of history talk about as an important moment, whether or not it all a smooth sail to Republican democracy and wider participation around the world. We'll see, and that would be, I think, a mistake to predict.
Finally, Kurt, I'm not looking for predictions here, but as this global digital revolution unfolds, how would you like to see the internet play an increasingly central role in building democracy in countries like Egypt, Russia, China, of course?
Well, that's a very good question, and I am more skeptical of the use of technology, if we mean what we can envision today, of a country voting by means of online or having constant referenda, that kind of ongoing participatory democracy. That makes me a little nervous, as opposed to the ways in which it's been used to protest, the way it will continue to be used to mobilize and galvanize political groups. But in terms of governing, obviously there are things that can be done, but again, the ability, the obvious technological ability to create a world of instant access and perpetual referenda that some of the digital blue sky thinkers and utopians for the last 20 years have been talking about, that makes me a little nervous. I mean, I am, there's such a thing as democracy that is too instant, I believe, and I think that part of what technology enables, and the technology of the internet as well as the technology of cable television, I think, is what it has has been a significant factor in causing the partisan ideological dysfunction we see in Washington. So my view of how technology enables a governing democracy over time is less entirely hopeful than my view of its use in shaking up the game and achieving greater democracy.
Well, Kurt Andersen, on that ambivalently instantaneous note, I want to thank you so much for appearing on TechCrunch TV. I want to wish you the best of luck in 2012 and hope that you will reappear at the show at the end of that year to talk about how the internet continues to change both our cultural and political world. Kurt Andersen, thank you so much.
Thank you.